My family cast me out, believing the vicious rumors my brother spread. Now, years later and thriving at 28, they're back, demanding money after abandoning me when I needed them most. I am a 28-year-old woman with a twin brother. Despite sharing the same birthday, our lives couldn't have been more different, especially with how our parents treated us. They seemed convinced from an early age that my brother was destined for greatness, a golden child whose successes were to be celebrated and nurtured. Meanwhile, I was labeled the black sheep merely because I had different interests. I was drawn to sports and friendships, finding solace in community and teamwork, while my brother was academically focused. My parents equated these traits to laziness on my part and often compared me to my twin in ways that chipped away at my self-esteem from as young as I can remember. Growing up, birthdays were a harsh reminder of this difference. While my brother enjoyed elaborate celebrations with friends, expensive gifts, and over-the-top decorations, I was barely acknowledged. He often had sleepovers filled with laughter and games, yet I was never even allowed to bring a single friend home. My childhood was lonely and, to be honest, bitter. The only person who ever showed me genuine affection was my grandmother. She would visit as often as she could, bringing my favorite chocolates or slipping a few dollars into my hand to spend on myself, gestures that reminded me someone cared. Without her, I would have had nothing but emptiness from those years. As time went on, what began as favoritism turned into emotional abuse. My parents would openly mock me for my grades and belittle my hobbies, acting as if I were a disappointment. Though I had talent in sports and was eager to join extracurriculars, they forbade me from participating, insisting I focus solely on academics, like my brother. The pressure was stifling, leaving me to feel inadequate and powerless. It was as if no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. Things escalated in high school. During my sophomore year, I was grounded over something as trivial as downloading Snapchat. Like many teens, I downloaded it to stay in touch with friends. But in my parents' eyes, this was a severe offense, a breach of their strict rules forbidding me from socializing. Their reaction was explosive. They stormed into my room, throwing my things around, even removing the door from its hinges, declaring I would no longer have privacy as long as I lived under their roof. The harsh punishment seemed disproportionate, and I could feel resentment building inside me. My twin brother took full advantage of the unfair environment our parents had created. Instead of supporting me, he made my life worse. Knowing our parents' willingness to believe the worst about me, he began to lie, making up stories and accusations, all designed to paint me in a terrible light. If he stole something, he'd place the blame on me. And my parents, already biased, never doubted his words. He humiliated me, even in front of my friends at school, often mocking my appearance to the point that I dreaded going home. Despite everything, I managed to build a social circle at school, making friends who liked me for my approachable and friendly nature. My twin, who struggled socially, became jealous of this, harboring resentment over my friendships. On our 14th birthday, his frustration reached a boiling point when none of his friends showed up for his party. I have no idea why they didn't come, but that day, my friends took me out for ice cream, and I had a genuinely enjoyable day. My brother's jealousy seemed to intensify with this contrast. His retaliation was ruthless. He started spreading vicious rumors at school, telling anyone who would listen that I was abusive toward him at home. He even went as far as to punch himself, creating bruises and black eyes to prove his lies. He would proudly display these self-inflicted injuries at school, telling people that I was violent. The rumors gained traction fast, fueled by his twisted stories, and soon even my closest friends were beginning to doubt me. At first, I didn't realize the extent of the damage. Friends who used to greet me warmly in the hallways started avoiding me, and invitations to hang out disappeared. The shift was subtle, but gut-wrenching. Finally, I confronted my former best friend, hoping to understand why everyone was acting so cold. She reluctantly confessed that my brother had been spreading horrendous lies, painting me as some kind of abusive tyrant. The betrayal was a punch to the gut, leaving me hurt, furious, and helpless. My own twin, the person I had grown up with, was tearing down everything I had built. I tried to confront him at home, desperate for him to stop the lies. But he brushed me off with a cruel smirk, saying I deserved to be left in isolation. His cold words shook me to the core. I realized then that he wasn't just jealous. He genuinely hated me. The fear of further alienation kept me from going to my parents, knowing they would take his side. Rumors snowballed, and even teachers began to treat me differently, as if I were some disruptive, problematic kid. Eventually, these lies reached the school principal, and I was called into his office with my brother and parents. I thought, or at least hoped, my brother would feel pressured to admit the truth. Instead, he doubled down, telling our principal that every word was true and adding even more horrifying details to his story. He painted me as a bully driven by jealousy, desperate to bring him down out of spite. My mother broke into tears, clutching my brother protectively, while my father praised him for his bravery in speaking up. I felt like I was drowning in their misplaced empathy for my brother while they stared at me with looks of betrayal and anger. My pleas fell on deaf ears as I tried to explain that none of it was true. The principal was adamant that bullying wasn't tolerated, and despite my protests, he decided to suspend me for 10 days. I broke down, begging him to reconsider, to look at the evidence, but he held firm, stating that the school had to set an example. I was heartbroken, humiliated, and most of all, defeated. When we returned home, things took a drastic turn. Without a word, my dad began packing up my belongings. I watched in horror, unsure of what was happening. My mom questioned him, but he snapped that he couldn't let me stay in the same house as my brother. I fell to my knees, clinging to his leg, begging him not to kick me out. But he was resolute, telling me I was no longer welcome in his house. He threatened to call my grandmother if I didn't leave on my own. Eventually, my grandmother arrived, gathering my things and helping me into her car. Before leaving, she gave my parents a piece of her mind, warning them she'd call the police or CPS if they ever came near me again. It was the first time I'd seen anyone stand up to them on my behalf. As we drove away, I felt numb, leaving behind the only home I had ever known and the family that had betrayed me. Living with my grandmother, I slowly began to recover. She believed in me wholeheartedly and reminded me daily that I was not at fault. When the suspension ended, I returned to school, but everything had changed. My classmates looked at me with suspicion, and friends continued to avoid me. I became a loner, retreating to the shadows, trying to survive high school without causing further ripples. My parents never called or checked up on me. They were as absent emotionally as they were physically. College became my escape, a fresh start. I found friends who appreciated me for who I was and no longer lived under constant scrutiny. In college, I discovered my passion for writing. What started as a side hustle, freelance writing to make ends meet, became my path to independence. By the time I graduated, I was earning enough to work full-time as a freelance writer, collaborating with notable clients and saving money to travel. My grandmother remained my only family. She supported my dreams, always encouraging me to chase after what made me happy. Despite my busy schedule, I made sure to visit her regularly. Those weekends with her became my favorite part of the week, where we'd share stories, meals, and laughter, and she'd always remind me of my strength and resilience. Recently, I completed a major project with a high-profile brand, which led to a TV interview. Proud of my work, I shared a few clips on social media, never anticipating the storm that would follow. The interview spread through the family grapevine, and soon enough, my parents caught wind of my success. A few days later, my phone was flooded with missed calls from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in years and felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread as I called back. To my surprise, they congratulated me before subtly shifting the conversation to their own struggles. My mom mentioned they had fallen on hard times, and my dad hinted that it was my duty to help them, given how well I was doing. I was livid, masking it behind politeness, and let them know I owed them nothing. In a moment of anger, I presented an ultimatum. If they wanted my help, they had to publicly admit to our family that my brother's lies were the reason I was cast out and that they had failed me as parents. Predictably, they balked, refusing to even consider it. Their voices grew harsh as they scolded me for disrespecting them, but I stood my ground. This was the closure I needed, and I felt at peace when I finally hung up. Ignoring the stream of calls and messages that followed, I had drawn my line in the sand, and I wasn't going to be guilted or manipulated any longer. Update 1. The past week has been overwhelming, but in a strangely cathartic way. The support from friends and strangers who learned of my story has reinforced my resolve not to cave to my parents' demands. Many expressed disbelief at my parents' audacity after everything they had put me through, and some even applauded my decision to set an impossible condition that forced them to confront the truth. Knowing they'd never fulfill it, I felt an odd sense of justice in finally holding them accountable, even if just in my mind. Then, out of nowhere, I received a message from my brother. I hadn't heard from him since high school, but the tone was venomous, as if the years of distance had only intensified his disdain. He mocked my ultimatum to our parents, insisting they'd never honor it because they never cared about me and would always protect him. He even admitted to lying about me all those years ago, brushing it off as if it were no big deal. "It's in the past, so stop being selfish," he wrote. The cherry on top was his jab about me being unmarried and childless, implying that my only purpose now was to support our parents financially. "Be a better daughter," he concluded, dripping with insincerity. Reading his words was like reopening an old wound. His complete lack of remorse, his flippant admission to years of pain he'd caused, and his audacious demand for my money, it was as if he was mocking everything I'd survived. Anger and sadness tangled within me, but so did determination. It was time to stop hiding the truth. Not just from him and my parents, but from the entire family who had no idea about what I endured. Fueled by a need for closure, I crafted an email detailing my childhood, my brother's lies, and my parents' cruel actions. In that email, I described everything: how I was blamed for things I never did, humiliated in front of friends and teachers, and eventually cast out. I attached a screenshot of my brother's message, his admission of guilt, and his total lack of empathy. It was raw, honest, and painful to write, but I needed my extended family to know the truth, to see beyond the lies my parents and brother had woven. I hit send, and for the first time, I felt a weight lift. Update 2. It's been a month since the email, and the fallout was swift and intense. Family members who had never known the full story were horrified, reaching out to apologize for not supporting me sooner. Many expressed disgust toward my parents for how they had treated me, with several relatives even cutting off contact with them altogether. The criticism my parents faced from people they had considered allies hit them harder than I expected, and it was oddly satisfying to see them face the consequences of their actions. Albeit years too late, predictably, my brother and parents bombarded me with furious messages. They accused me of ruining the family, lashing out with insults and threats, but I had anticipated this reaction. Feeling unbothered, I reached out to a lawyer who promptly issued a cease and desist letter. The letter warned them against further contact, explaining that if they continued their harassment, they'd face legal repercussions. For the first time, they seemed genuinely afraid. The messages stopped, and I felt the silence as a newfound peace. My grandmother, as always, has been my steadfast support. She reassured me that speaking my truth was the right thing to do, even if it made waves. "You've spent too long keeping their secrets," she said one evening, and her words became my mantra. Her unwavering belief in me was all I needed to move forward. Update 3. 2 months have passed since my last update, and I feel like I've finally reclaimed my life. My career as a content writer is thriving. I've been invited to speak at conferences and podcasts, and my work has gained recognition that still feels surreal. I've built a reputation for myself, and I'm financially stable. Something I'd never thought possible after leaving my parents' home with nothing but a suitcase and my grandmother's love. My grandmother and I are closer than ever. I took a week off to spend with her recently, savoring the simplicity of our time together. She's taken up gardening, and we spent hours talking about flowers, the meaning behind different herbs, and her stories about each plant's significance. These moments with her are treasures I'll always hold dear. Since receiving the cease and desist, my family has respected the boundary. No more calls, no more demands, no more guilt. I've started therapy, working through the years of hurt and betrayal that defined my childhood, and slowly but surely, I'm healing. For once, I feel in control, unburdened by their expectations, and free to build a future on my terms. And so, as I close this chapter, I feel an immense sense of relief. I've fought hard for my happiness, and I've surrounded myself with people who value me for who I am. The journey hasn't been easy, but knowing I've come this far makes it all worth it. This may be my last update, but it's also the start of a new, brighter chapter in my life. Commentary. This story is such a powerful example of resilience and the courage it takes to stand up against a family that's supposed to be your foundation, but instead becomes the source of unimaginable betrayal. OP's journey, from enduring a biased and lonely childhood to thriving independently, is nothing short of inspiring. Her parents' blatant favoritism and her twin brother's manipulative cruelty clearly left scars, yet OP chose a path of strength, turning her back on their toxicity to create a better life for herself. That takes an inner resilience that's truly admirable. Her brother's actions, from lying to self-harming to smear OP's reputation, reflect a deeply ingrained jealousy and spite that only festered under her parents' enabling. The family's belief in his twisted narratives without a second thought shows how deeply bias can blind people to the truth, especially when they're too invested in upholding their favored narratives. Imagine being so cast aside by your own family that they accept fabricated stories from one child, while refusing to even consider the other's perspective. OP's emotional isolation during those years must have been harrowing. Through her grandmother's love and support, OP managed to rebuild, and over time, rise above the damage. Her success as a writer not only proves her capability, but also serves as a kind of poetic justice. The child they cast out and belittled grew to thrive beyond anything they could have imagined, and all on her own terms. When OP's family reappeared, demanding financial support, she held her ground, making it clear that they would have to acknowledge the pain they caused if they wanted anything from her, a brilliant move that forced them to confront their past without allowing them to control her future. Her brother's unapologetic message, sneering at her success and even admitting his lies, reveals a chilling lack of remorse. That he expected OP to just get over it and support her family shows his continued entitlement and lack of respect for the damage he's caused. OP's decision to expose her story to the extended family was a necessary act of self-empowerment. Her truth-telling not only freed her from years of secrecy, but also shed light on the painful reality her family had chosen to hide. This openness led to the confrontation her parents and brother likely never anticipated, leaving them scrambling to face the consequences of their own choices. With her grandmother and a growing circle of people who appreciate her, OP has now surrounded herself with the genuine love and respect she deserved all along. Her strength and boundary setting illustrate a critical message. Sometimes, our real family is the one we choose, not necessarily the one we're born into. OP's story is a testament to the power of resilience and self-respect. Here's to her continued success and peace. If you've ever struggled with family dynamics that left you feeling undervalued or cast aside, remember that your worth isn't defined by those who fail to see it. OP's story reminds us that breaking away from toxic relationships, even family ones, is sometimes necessary for growth and happiness. Seek out supportive people, whether friends, mentors, or chosen family, who value you for who you truly are. Healing may take time, but setting boundaries and owning your truth is the first step to building a life on your terms. Share your own experiences or words of encouragement below. Let's uplift one another in breaking free and thriving independently.